Thank you all for being here today. My name is Dr. Taslim Alani-Verjee. I am the founder and director of Salem Center for Mental Health, and I'm also a registered psychologist. The point of today's webinar is to discuss managing our well-being while working from home. There are a lot of different contexts to working from home right now, so I wanted to really start by addressing some of those. With the group that we have today, I'm hoping that this can be an interactive webinar, so feel free to be asking questions throughout. And we're going to have a moderator. Her name is Taslim Alani-Verjee. Yassine, if you want to show yourself. And she's going to be fielding those questions and answers. Yassine is a registered social worker and is also on the SILM team. Give us a wave, Yassine. Thanks. And so ask any of the questions. One of the important things to recognize is that I obviously don't have all the answers. That's not my intention here. It's rather to try to share some information, share some tips and strategies, and hopefully each of you will find something that's going to work. But I also recognize that everyone's context is a little bit different. And so if you're not necessarily hearing something that works for you or some of the tips need to be adapted, please ask and we'll figure it out together. We also have a lot of really brilliant people on the webinar who are participating today. And so if you have ideas, feel free to also throw them into the chat, and then we can kind of have a discussion about them after. So let's think about all of the changes that have happened over the last 3 to 4 weeks. We have folks that are working or studying from home in a way that is quite new for them. There's potential job loss or job change, perhaps for you, but also maybe for people you know, your partner, perhaps your parents, your friends, and so kind of just dealing with that change. The need to stay at home, and even if you were someone who stayed at home quite often to begin with, now there's a bit of a restriction put on that, and that can be a little bit different to wrap our minds around. There's also restrictions in terms of food and entertainment, what we can do to have fun. There's the social distancing protocol, which means that even the people we used to like to hang out with, we're probably not doing a whole lot of that anymore. We might have kids or a partner or parents who are at home with us, and so we're spending a lot more time with those individuals than we're used to, probably. And they might not always be the best people to be around, and especially if we're living in smaller environments, that can be extremely overwhelming. People around us are probably getting sick. And if you're like me, every time you hear a sneeze or a cough, you get kind of nervous. And every time you sneeze or cough, you get kind of nervous. And so there's that added layer of being on guard that's quite new for a lot of us. And then there are people who are passing away. We might know some of them. We might know people who are passing away. But these are just some of the changes that we have started to experience over the past 3 weeks, and all of this can be extremely overwhelming. Now, the reason I talk about that within the context of a work from home webinar is because we can't just talk about working from home in isolation of all of the rest of it. This is a very new time, and we're all dealing with very new contexts. It's not just that your setting has changed, but your emotions have probably changed. The pressure on you has probably changed. Your fear and anxiety have probably changed. And so it's important to just acknowledge that this new culture of working from home comes with a lot of baggage. So some of the effects of these changes can include increased stress, which is something that occurs when a problem is too big for us or we don't necessarily know how to solve it, or when we perceive it as dangerous. And in the context of COVID-19 or coronavirus, as we may know it, it's both of these things, right? This is a problem that is really big for all of us. And we can hear our governments even talking about how this problem is so big that they're struggling now to come up with solutions so that people can stay safe, people can maintain their housing and maintain their employment as best as possible. But then there's also a direct threat to us as beings. And while we may not be necessarily worried about that threat to us, we might be worried about it for our parents, our family members, our friends, our loved ones. And so this is actually dangerous. When we're stressed, we can often notice some changes within ourselves. So one is that our bodies are usually a little bit more tense. We might engage in impulsive behavior, so not necessarily thinking things through, being on edge, being irritable, and sometimes making irrational decisions or engaging in irrational behaviors. The other thing that might happen is anxiety. And so anxiety is very similar to stress, but usually includes either a buildup of stressful things or represents one larger stressful event that our body then responds to and our mind then responds to with anxiety. So when we're feeling anxious, we might feel out of control. We may engage again in impulsivity. We may be physically distant or feeling emotionally paralyzed or numb, so not feeling a whole lot. We might be more distracted, which probably a lot of us are a little bit more distracted than usual right now. We may be more irritable. We may be a little bit more snappy, even when, people aren't getting on our nerves. We might still, not be the nicest version of ourselves to them. And when our anxiety really escalates, we might even experience panic attacks, which is a surge of anxious symptoms, usually physiologically anxious symptoms at once. Then there's grief. Now, we've all experienced a lot of loss, whether we've really thought about it or not. One is coming with the change that's happened and knowing that things are never going to be the way they used to be before. But the other is knowing that things are probably going to continue to be different, and we don't know what that is, but we're already feeling the worry behind it. Even when we read articles in the news, we're hearing, there's this weird quiet going on at the hospitals before the giant storm that's about to come, but we don't know what that storm looks like. And at this point, really nobody does, but we're scared and it makes us sad. And so we're grieving that loss that is about to come. When we experience grief, often this comes with a feeling of numbness or withdrawal. We might be bitter. We might be socially and emotionally detached. We may have a preoccupation with loss. So it's all we're able to think about, even when we're trying to do something that we usually enjoy or be with people that we usually enjoy being with. We may have an inability to show or experience joy, and we may experience depression. While working from home and with all these changes, what we might start to experience is burnout. Now, burnout is working until we run out of fuel, and many of us will experience burnout throughout our lives. Working from home, research tells us that working from home can often lead to burnout. One of the reasons why is because we often feel like we need to prove ourselves a little bit more to show that we warrant the working from home. And often employees are grateful to employers for the opportunity to work from home. Now, if you're in a workplace where a lot of people were laid off and you're one of the people who weren't, then you might also be feeling that extra pressure to perform. And when we push ourselves so hard, we are more likely to experience that burnout because we lose whatever kind of balance we had going on before. Now, when we experience burnout, what we might feel is apathy, so a complete disinterest, lack of motivation, even in things that we once cared about. We might also experience absenteeism, so that's no longer showing up for things that we're supposed to show up for, especially as it relates to work and other responsibilities. We might experience depression, we might have poor performance, and we might be lonely. And speaking of loneliness, this is probably also one of the things that we're experiencing right now, whether or not we're working from home, right? This is a very different time. And so a lot of us might be experiencing loneliness and isolation. Research tells us that most people, or at least a large proportion of people, were already feeling some sort of loneliness prior to all of this happening. Some research from the US tells us that just 2 or 3 years ago, 50% of Americans reported feeling lonely, feeling chronically lonely. And I can't imagine that stats in Canada would be a whole lot different. Now, add what's going on top of that, of the stress, the physical distancing for a lot of us, the withdrawing because we're feeling overwhelmed, and taking away whatever communal places we used to gather, whether it's going to church or to mosque, going to the library, meeting up with friends, games nights, and not going to work anymore. And so we've completely removed ourselves from whatever social interactions we used to have, which likely increases our loneliness and our isolation. Now, some people may be very comfortable not seeing people very often, and that's totally fine, right? Do what feels best for you. But for a lot of us, simply the restrictions on what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do might be impacting how we're feeling. So when individuals feel loneliness or when they feel isolated, they're more likely to experience burnout. And so we can see those things go hand in hand. The other thing is that they might feel some depression. They might be more easily distracted. They might have accelerated cognitive decline and impaired executive functioning, which means the brain just isn't working as efficiently as we'd like it to be working. And so we might make more mistakes. We might not necessarily think through problems as well as we usually do. And we might be less aware of what's actually going on in our own minds. We might experience poor sleep, and we might actually experience a decrease in our immunity, which means we're more likely to get sick. And so when we look at all of these things together, the stress, the anxiety, the grief, the burnout, the loneliness, and the isolation, again, regardless of whether we're working from home or not, these are pretty big deals. Now, when we add working from home on top of that, we're kind of asking for a recipe for disaster. And so it's important to remember that regardless of what's going on, regardless of your workload right now, things are hard. Things are very hard, and they're not just hard for you, they're hard for everyone. And for some people, the working from home situation might mean that their workload has actually decreased. And for some, it means their workload has increased. And so regardless of the situation, working from home and this new transition comes with a lot of adapting. And even for those who were working from home before, they're probably having fewer client meetings or patient interactions. And this is also a change. There's probably a little bit more concern about income stability for a lot of us. And this too comes with a lot of worry. So what can we do? I mean, this is probably why we're all here, is the what can we do part of it. The first thing that we can try to do is maintain a routine. So routines have been demonstrated to help us cope with change. Simply having a structure helps us feel like we have more control over what's going on. And if you're like me and you're someone who likes to have a plan and likes to have control, that routine helps us maintain that. And so it's really, really important. The other thing a routine can do is it can reduce our stress levels, and it can lead to increased sleep quality. I mean, I'm just going to take a quick poll of the audience here, but how many people's sleep schedules have actually changed since they've been working from home? I won't, if you want to answer, you can. But the reality is that many of us, yep, sleep is horrible. And I have another person saying mine. And this is the reality of the situation. We lose routine. And when our emotions are heightened, when our stress is heightened, we're less likely to use the strategies we know that work. So for most of us, we probably know what time we like to go to bed to get the best sleep and what time we like to wake up to get the best sleep. And yet for some reason, when everything feels like it's out of control, we lose the things that work best for us. I also see someone here talking about strange dreams. Absolutely. When we're stressed, we're more likely to have our brains working in different ways while we're sleeping. And when we're worried about things, those worries often creep into our dreams in weird ways. And so what you might be seeing is that you actually feel less rested because of these weird dreams, because of this change in sleep routine. So how do we build routine? How do we set a routine? First, we can start by setting work hours. And so, if a 9 to 5 workday works, that's great. If a 9 to 5 just isn't your jam, or that's not the hours you were working before, don't do it. Find something that works for you as long as you're meeting your workplace requirements. The other thing is to try to use a planner. So write things down step by step by step, and perhaps even hour by hour, or maybe not minute by minute, but maybe in 15-minute increments. This helps us know exactly how we're spending our time and helps us feel a little bit more accountable to the time that we're spending. And if you're like me, then you're also feeling like you're not necessarily accomplishing a whole lot in the day, even though you've been working all day. And so by having a list of everything that you want to do during the day and being able to check it off as you go helps you feel accomplished, helps you feel productive, and therefore helps you feel better. Create a workspace. And this can be part of the routine, right? In the day-to-day, have a place where you're going to work. It doesn't matter where it is. Ideally, it's going to be comfortable, it's going to be ergonomic, it's going to be ideal for working, but we have the space that we have. And for some of us, that might mean the couch. For some of us, it might mean the kitchen counter. Some of us might have a desk or a dining table. Find a place and use that specifically for work if your space allows you to do it. What that helps you do is have a space where your mind can focus on working. And then when you move away from that space, it allows your brain to actually detach from the setting. The other thing is to create a few more boundaries around work. So other things you can try to do is schedule your eating time, make sure you stop work at the right time and don't use the same kinds of materials that you were using before. If you are privileged enough to have several sets of technology, maybe don't use the same computer you use for work for connecting with people after work. You might be able to use a tablet or use your phone, but to even have those kinds of boundaries so that when you're sitting on the sofa after work, you're not necessarily just checking emails just in case, or just scrolling through a few things just in case. That helps us compartmentalize and have better boundaries. Part of our routine also includes the after work hour things. So this can include socializing, of course, while maintaining physical distance, but finding ways that are meaningful for us to connect with one another. So this can mean, video calling with people. It can mean playing on fun apps that I'm just learning about. It can mean messaging. It can mean liking things on people's Facebook or Instagram. It doesn't matter how you do it, but find ways that are meaningful for you to connect with others. One thing that we're learning is that because people are at home more, they're actually increasing the amount of screen time that they are accessing. And so what that does is usually it leads to more strain in the eyes, it can lead to headaches, it can lead to poor posture and chronic pain. And so what we want to do is try to make sure that when we are engaging in interactions with others, that we're really getting quality interactions and that we're doing the things that actually feel meaningful to us. Otherwise, we might spend our whole evening talking to people and really just feeling drained and empty after. And so do the things that recharge you. And for some of us, that means not really talking to anyone at all. And that's okay, right? Do what works for you. And then make a plan for your after work hours. So make sure you have a plan for what you're going to eat. Make sure you have a plan for how you're going to spend your evening. Because if you don't have a plan, you're way more likely to just continue to sit and to work until you can't work anymore. You've maybe missed your dinner time, you're exhausted, and then you have nothing left to give to yourself. Another thing to do on top of setting a routine is to try to engage in mindfulness. So mindfulness is about being fully present and aware of any given moment, and to do so in a non-judgmental way. So when we can do this, we can just really connect with where we're at, what we're doing, and allow ourselves to not lose ourselves, but rather connect with ourselves and our experience even more. So mindfulness is known to increase our overall subjective well-being. It can also help reduce any kinds of psychological or emotional reactive symptoms that we might have. And so that overall helps us just feel better so that our emotions aren't doing this. It can improve our behavioral regulation so that we're not as impulsive as we might be, especially given the stress and the anxiety that a lot of us might be experiencing. It can increase our memory capacity, and it can increase our self-control. Research on mindfulness shows that it actually changes the way our brain is structured and increases the gray matter in the brain, which is what a lot of our frontal cortex is made of. And so it's actually increasing our capacity to know ourselves better, to think through things better, and to be aware of the world around us better. So overall, it's great. Also hard, so we'll talk about that. But in terms of productivity, mindfulness has been demonstrated to reduce work-life conflict. And so we actually end up doing a little bit better at balancing our work and life. It can increase job satisfaction, and it can increase our ability to focus and pay attention. And so these are all great things when it comes to working from home and working outside of the home. So what are some ways that we can engage in mindfulness? Number one, do one thing at a time and really, really allow yourself to engage in it. So this means not, watching TV while scrolling through your phone, while having something on the stove. But rather, even if you're going to watch TV, just watch the TV, listen to it, observe the colors, notice your emotions, notice your thoughts. Mindfulness doesn't have to be something new. It could be something you do already. And when we do the things we do already and we do them mindfully, what we actually realize is that we are able to engage in things and understand them so much more and enjoy them so much more. Mindfulness is not always an enjoyable thing because sometimes that means sitting through discomfort. For example, our emotions are not always comfortable. Having to write an assertive email is not always comfortable. Having to assert our boundaries is not always very comfortable. And yet when we're mindful, what we can do is really be aware of what's channeling some of that discomfort, and to know and trust that we can still be okay even if we are uncomfortable. And so being able to be aware of it helps. I mean, how many times have any of us said or done something without really realizing why we did it until a little bit later, and we could step back and reflect on it, right? When we're able to be mindful, there's no behaving and then thinking later. It's all one. And so when it's all one, we're just able to be a lot more effective. We want to commit to the practice. And so, like I said, mindfulness can be quite challenging, and it's using new parts of our brain that we might not be used to using, and practicing focus and attention in a way that we might not be used to practicing that. And so when we commit to a practice, as big or as small as we want to make it, then that allows us to actually strengthen those mindfulness muscles, if you will. And so whether it's I'm going to watch, 5 minutes of TV mindfully, or I'm going to try to take 3 bites of my meal mindfully, I'm going to take a shower mindfully, whatever it is, commit to that practice and do it for as long as you can. What you might start to realize is that your capacity to do it increases, and you might want to add more of these mindful exercises throughout your day. Now, if you're not sure how to start that way, the other thing you can try to do is use a guided mindfulness app. And there are tons and tons and tons of those out there in the world, so you can find one that works for you. One that I really like is called Insight Timer. I'll just type that here so that you folks can see it. Insight Timer really just consists of a large library of over 10,000 guided mindfulness exercises. So then you can pick what works for you. You can pick mindfulness exercises with music. You can use one where someone is speaking to you. You can use ones that are more spiritually fueled. You can have something structured, and you can pick the amount of time. So whether it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, Insight Timer has a whole bunch of resources regardless of where you're at in your mindfulness practice. Yassine's also saying that she uses an app called Calm, and I've heard great things about Calm as well. So that's another one that you could try. And the other thing to try is to do things that you've done before, but try to do them in a new way so that you can re-experience them. So for example, when you're washing the dishes, try a new technique. Or when you're showering, maybe try soaping before you shampoo your hair in case you do it the other way around. But when we switch things up, it allows us to be forced to pay a little bit more attention. And doing that allows us to engage a little bit more. When you're listening to your favorite song, try really paying attention to the words as opposed to the music, or the music as opposed to the words. You can even play a game where you try to identify the instruments, and that can be a way of re-experiencing some of that. The other thing we can try to do is increase awareness. So check in with yourselves regularly. Ask yourself, how am I doing right now? There are some really helpful tools that we can use when we think about how we're doing right now. But one is to even just, ask yourself, what emotions am I feeling right now, and how intense am I feeling those emotions right now? A simple check-in like that can make you really understand where you're at and what you need. The other thing is, when you can notice the intensity of your emotions, you can then start to think about whether you need to do something about it, right? So if you're feeling frustrated and you're at a 3, you can probably sit with that. But if you're feeling frustrated and you're at a 10 and you're about to write an email, it's probably a good time to pause and take a break. And so when you can kind of check in with yourselves around how you're doing, that allows you to be a little bit more effective. Now, when we think about that within the grand scheme of things of what's going on right now with COVID-19, it does require a lot of check-in and a lot of awareness around what's happening for us, because we may have moments where we're extremely stressed and extremely overwhelmed. And so being able to even just notice that that's where we're at, and being able to take breaks and rest for a while, to do something fun if we have the opportunity to do so, all of that can make a really big difference. When we work on increasing our awareness, we're actually building our metacognition. And so the metacognitive ability is our ability to be aware of our own thoughts. So it's not just that I'm thinking that, for example, I want to go for a walk, but now I'm aware of the thought that I want to go for a walk. Now, while this may seem silly to think about, every once in a while, what we do is we actually have judgmental thoughts, or we have negative self-talk. Now, when we can practice being aware of our negative self-thought or our judgments, they stop being facts that feel real, and they start being things that we can observe. And so that metacognitive ability actually helps us with mindfulness, but it also helps us engage in more self-control, and it helps our thoughts have less power over us, especially if we're the type of people who engage in a lot of judgmental thought or who get carried away in negative self-talk. And it allows early intervention to be put in place. The last thing I want to talk about is compassion. So when I talk about compassion, this really means about kindness, and it's kindness to ourselves and kindness to others. So when we talk about kindness to ourselves or self-compassion, the reason why this is extremely important is if we go back to what's going on with us right now, all of the changes that we're overcoming or surviving right now, all of the things that we might be feeling, like I said, it's a lot. It is a lot for anyone. And so you may not be as productive as you're used to being. You may not be as articulate as you're used to being. You may not be as physically active. You may not be as creative. You may have lost all of the cool hobbies that you do. You may not be cleaning that closet out like everyone tells you should be doing. It doesn't matter. Right now, it's hard. And so let's have some self-compassion. Let's recognize that already, without additional stressors of new tasks or losing weight or cooking healthy meals, our minds, our bodies, and our spirits are stressed and overwhelmed. Simply existing and doing bare minimum is enough right now. And so when we're hard on ourselves, it makes it a lot more difficult to then overcome. When we can engage in self-compassion, we actually increase our productivity, because what's happening is instead of being hard on ourselves, being mad at ourselves, especially when we make mistakes or we're not as effective as we meant to be, if we can be self-compassionate, we can recover from that a lot more quickly. And when we can recover from it a lot more quickly, we can bounce back, we can be resilient, and we can continue on with what we have to do. But when we're not, we're hard on ourselves, we're judgmental, we can't believe that we made such a big mistake, and our thoughts take over and we get stuck there, sometimes for a really long time. And that can lead to more and more errors and less productivity. It also increases our commitment to our goals. So when we are able to be self-compassionate, then we can focus on what's important to us, and we can really commit to what is important to us. Self-compassion can prevent chronic illness, and it can decrease frustration. So overall, self-compassion is great. When we think about compassion towards others, it's really important to remember that right now, even though we're all likely going through many of the similar changes, our contexts are all very, very different. So we can think about, for example, those who are working from home, who are completely by themselves living at home, versus those who are living at home with a partner who's also working from home, versus a partner who recently got laid off, versus having children, versus having pets, versus having parents that require care, right? Each of these different situations require different demands of us. And so when we think about our coworkers, when we think about our colleagues, we can't necessarily expect them to be performing the same way we are, and they can't expect us to be performing the same way they are, right? We are all in different contexts right now. So being able to understand that and have compassion for it can allow us to actually work a lot more effectively and collaboratively with our teams, and can decrease frustration. Then there's also that change in workload that we talked about before. So for some of us, working from home actually means an increased workload. And for some of us, it means we're spending a lot of time not really knowing how we're supposed to be productive at work. We're kind of twiddling our thumbs. And it doesn't really matter what that change is, but it brings about different emotions. And so being able to recognize that working from home also means really different things. And so when we're talking to other people about their experiences working from home, we probably ought not to assume that their experience is a lot different than ours, and we ought not to necessarily be very jealous or envious of them, because that also comes with different baggage. It can be really hard for some people to not have anything to do, and it can be really hard for some people to have way more to do. And so being able to be compassionate and be accepting of different people's realities can help us with our own frustration, can probably help them with their frustration, and allows us to connect with one another better. It can decrease stress. It can increase job satisfaction when we're compassionate with those we work with. In terms of employee retention, making sure that we have compassionate work cultures also allows people to stay in their workplaces more, which is less of an HR nightmare. It can decrease frustration. It can improve collaboration, and it increases resilience to burnout and to anxiety. So let's build our compassion muscles. There are also some ways that we can care for our overall mental health. And so these include engaging in balanced thoughts. So if you notice that your mind is going into extremes, for example, I didn't do anything today, or my boss is probably going to fire me if I don't get this done. These are really extreme thoughts. And when you have them, notice them, and then perhaps try to challenge them with a more balanced thought. The thought is never going to hurt you, but the moment you buy into it is the moment you latch onto it. So notice it and either just accept it for a thought and just the way it is and let it go, or challenge it. And we can challenge it by saying, I wasn't as productive as I wanted to be, but I still got X, Y, and Z done. Doesn't matter how big or small X, Y, and Z are, just being able to recognize that we are getting things done can be really helpful. The other thing to try to do is to have fun. Now, for those of us whose workload has actually increased, or who have people that we need to care for at home, we might not have a whole lot of time to have fun. And so this isn't about starting a new hobby or picking up a new activity, but it is about inserting moments of fun into the day in whatever way you can. So it might be trying new food. It might be listening to your favorite song. It might be following along dance routines on YouTube. It might be playing games with some of your friends or family. It doesn't matter what it is, but try to have some fun if you can. It really gives us a break from the worry and the anxiety, as well as the pressure and responsibility of work. Try to channel your creativity. However you do that, no matter how much time it takes, creativity is really important and usually gives us a drive towards feeling productive, as well as feeling like we're working towards something. And so find ways to do that for yourself. Again, it doesn't need to be this huge new project, but maybe take 5 minutes every single day and work on something creative. That in and of itself can increase our well-being. We can also try to take care of others. And because we know that a lot of people are having a hard time right now, investing in taking care of others, as long as we have the capacity to do so, can bring us tremendous satisfaction and can make us feel like we're at least doing something. Try to find purpose. And it doesn't really matter what that purpose is, but right now is a hard time, and right now comes with a lot of unknowns. So reflecting on the kind of person you want to be, the kinds of things you want to accomplish, small or big, doesn't matter, but work towards those things and try to find meaning from those things. Maintain physical activity, and our wonderful Yassine did a webinar on that yesterday, and so if you missed it, you can tune in on our YouTube channel. And then try to maintain a healthy diet. Doesn't really matter what that healthy is, but find healthy for you and try to stick to it. Now, of course, this is a long list of all of the wonderful things that we can do. And if none of those are going to work for you right now because all you can do is bare minimum, do that bare minimum. But if you have some capacity, try to do your best to integrate these things into your daily routine. We can also try to decrease our social media engagement, right? Whatever we're scrolling through right now is probably extremely overwhelming. We're probably seeing news spins on the same story over and over again, and we're probably feeling bombarded by it. And so if you can restrict your social media use, that would be great. And so it might be, choosing to do it for 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes closer to the evening. That's fine. Or the other thing you can try to do is for a little while, mute or unfollow some of the people who are reporting on the news or who engage in rants about their anger of what's going on in the world, and try to follow new people or like new people or new topics that can bring you a little bit more enjoyment, whether it's travel or pets or new recipes, just to give yourself a little bit of a balance. A lot of us engage in our social media use pretty regularly, and changing that behavior might not be something we have the capacity to do right now, but we can still change how we engage in it. When it comes to social connectedness, we can also talk to our loved ones about how we want to connect with them. I know that a lot of people, when they get a video call unexpectedly, it almost feels like someone's knocking at your door and they know you're home, so you best answer. And that can come with a lot of stress and anxiety. So if getting those unexpected video calls is not something that makes you feel safe at home and comfortable at home, let people know that. Let people know that you'd rather have a warning or you'd rather schedule those things. You are allowed to have boundaries and you're allowed to say no. So make sure that you remember that and try to do that as much as possible. If you notice that things are getting too hard, that might be time to reach out for help. Now, this might mean talking to a loved one or a friend about where you're at. It might be reaching out to a professional about this. It might be talking to your employer about it, and not necessarily about your feelings if you don't want to talk to your employer about your feelings, but it might be talking about your workload or talking about some time off. This might not feel like the best time to be requesting time off, and yet if you need to, otherwise things are going to deteriorate, it's better to be proactive about it. Try to slow down as best as you can if things are starting to get too hard, and advocate for more of what you want and less of what you don't want in the workplace and in the home. Just because we're doing things a certain way doesn't mean there isn't flexibility for change. And it might so happen that one of your coworkers loves the stuff that you don't like, and you love the stuff that your coworker doesn't like. And so if there can be a little bit of exchange, then that can be helpful. And then we can also try to switch things up. And so do things differently, change up our routine, try to find new activities. All of these things can help us when things get too hard. The last thing I'd like to say is that when it comes to reaching out to help from a professional, most professionals right now are engaging in telehealth. So whether that's online services for therapy, whether it's phone services for therapy, you don't need to go into the office right now. And so if you don't want to, you definitely don't have to, but most places are seeing their clients virtually anyway. At Film Center for Mental Health, we have a sliding scale and we do our best not to turn anyone away. And so if this is a time where you do need extra support, reach out. We're here to help, as are all of the other mental health professionals who are trained and willing to help. So with that, I'll maybe pause and see if there are any questions from our wonderful participants. I'm not seeing any. Yassine, did you get any questions on the side? Oh, yes, I can unmute you.
I have a question for you. So you talked about how during this time you might feel more like easily irritated or more easily frustrated, and maybe folks aren't totally aware of where that irritation or frustration is stemming from, and it just kind of happens all of a sudden. How would you recommend dealing with like recognizing when you start to feel irritated, and then like what are some strategies for coping with that so that you're not just kind of like, lashing out at people and then regretting it later?
Absolutely, because no one wants to lash out at people and then regret it later. Lashing out maybe, regretting it later, usually not. So one of the things that we can start to do is that self-awareness piece that I mentioned before. So what can be helpful is even starting to create, if you know that irritability and frustration are kind of your key triggers, is to assess for yourself, what does a 2 look like when you're frustrated or irritable? What does a 4 look like? What does a 6 look like? What does an 8 look like? The more you can notice your own internal patterns, the more effective we become at recognizing just where we are at in terms of that. And when we're getting to certain points, we can then put in effective interventions for each of those things. So for example, for a lot of us, when we're getting frustrated to the point where we're probably not going to be able to manage effectively, we usually notice that our faces are getting a little bit more warm, our hearts are racing, we might even notice some tension in our shoulders, or that we're making fists, or our muscles are just tense. Usually that's a good indicator that you're frustrated to the point where you probably need to step away before taking action. Research tells us that being able to even pause and take 3 deep breaths can be enough for us to de-escalate enough to either be able to come back to the situation later and have the willpower to do that, or even to be able to deal with the situation at hand without walking away, but to deal with it in a more effective way. And so if you notice your frustration building, if you notice that you're irritable, pause, assess the situation, breathe, and then make a decision of what you have to do next.
Yay. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have another question for you. So this question is around how to create the space of an office at home. So I guess like how to carve out that space for yourself so that you feel more organized in your home space, just as you would feel in your office space.
Totally. So one of the cool things about working from home, although it might not feel super cool right now, is that you get to make it your own in a lot of ways that you might not have been able to in the workplace. And so, it depends on your setting, right? If you have a lot of space and a lot of different spots where you could choose your workspace, then you have a little bit more flexibility. But one of the things that I usually suggest to people is to find, number one, a really comfortable chair, especially if most of what you're doing all day is sitting. And so that's number one. The other thing is to make sure that at the beginning of the day, you have what you need in front of you. And by the end of the day, you've put stuff away. That helps you kind of feel more organized and structured and helps you compartmentalize and have those boundaries in a more effective way. One of the things that I think is helpful is to like even have your dishes and your mug that are specifically for work. And that way, your work dishes are your work dishes and your home dishes are your home dishes. And if you don't want to get a whole new set of dishes, that's totally fine. But many of us have random mugs at home. And so maybe pull one of those out, make it your work mug. Try to have good lighting. If you can, try to sit next to a window. And if you don't have access to outdoors, even opening a window and turning a fan on makes us feel like we're a little bit more exposed to the elements. But being able to do some of that can be really helpful in trying to feel like we're actually at work. If we don't have a lot of people in the home, then kind of maintaining a quiet work environment can be helpful. But if we do, then we might want to try to create some boundaries around that too. So even saying like, okay, guys, I'm going to make this my workspace. So please try to respect it as much as you can, and doing it that way. The other thing that I think might be helpful if you're someone who listens to music while at work, listen to the same playlists you used to listen to. I know for myself, I have a work playlist. And so when I listen to that work playlist, that's when I know my body can and my brain can kind of feel like it's in thinking mode. And so maybe even tuning into your work playlist helps it feel a little bit more like work and helps get our mind set towards work.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to, there's one more.
So, okay. Okay, yeah. So this is a question around, how do we deal with things that get interrupted unexpectedly because of the virus? Whether that means like you're taking a class, you're enrolled in school, and things are kind of just put on pause, and you're just kind of waiting and not really sure when stuff will pick back up again.
Yeah, so this is really tough. And I teach at the graduate level, and I know that this is something that a lot of students are really concerned about. They feel like they might not graduate on time or meet all the requirements. They might not know what's happening with classes. One of the things that might be helpful to do is to reach out to your university or your college if you haven't heard from them already around what the plan is. There might already be plans for summer school courses to be online. There might be plans for courses to be moved from a grade to a pass-fail. So getting some of that information might help you feel like you have a little bit more control about what's going on. Now, if things have been paused, so you're not necessarily getting the hours that you need or the prerequisites that you need in order to graduate, my understanding is that a lot of colleges and universities are also working with students to make sure that this doesn't affect them in a way that will get in the way of them graduating. Now, of course, we all need the essential practical requirements that we need, but I think there is a little bit of flexibility in terms of changing deadlines so that you can at least get your hours done. So reach out to the people who have those answers, and if they don't have them yet, they're probably working towards them. And so it might just be about being a little bit more patient and trying not to overthink it. One of the things is that we actually don't have a whole lot of control over these things right now. And so no matter how much we overthink it and try to problem solve it, this is one of the things that we can't actually problem solve ourselves until we have the answers that we need. And so instead of diving in and getting stuck in that cycle, just try to stop. Try to stop, do something else instead. Focus your attention and your energy on something until you have the information to come up with a plan that's going to work effectively for you.
Great.
Okay, so if I can do this, I'm going to try to save or share a last slide. I can do it. So this is how to contact us. So if you are looking to reach out for services, if you have any questions, if you have ideas about more webinars, feel free to reach out to us. This is what we're here for, and we're really excited to be here, especially because we don't know how long this is going to last. If you want information about a specific topic, if you want to see us be doing different things, if you have feedback, please reach out. Please spread the word that we're here. We want to be available to our communities. We want to serve our communities, and we will do so in whatever way possible. So with that, thank you so much to everyone for attending today. This will be available on YouTube at some point today or tomorrow. Remember to check in and tune in to Yassine's webinar from yesterday, which is also on YouTube. And all of our other webinars, as we do them, will be hosted on our YouTube channel, which is Salem Center for Mental Health. Thank you again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.